Okay, I think that's working now. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Kylie Bradfield and I currently work at the University of Stirling in Scotland in initial teacher education. During these very strange times, many Scottish teachers have contacted me about some professional development, and I've done a few professional development sessions for some groups. One of the topics that is quite popular at the moment is the notion of reciprocal reading, which is quite strange. It's been around for about 40 years, but talking about it has made me realise that there are people who are still wanting to know about this and perhaps have heard about it but don't know the basics. So today is about that. It's to give you the basics. It's to show you the way you can implement it in the classroom to make sure that you make the most of it. As it's an introduction, you'll need to do some follow-up work. You'll need to find lots of other pieces of information to help you implement it perfectly. But this should at least give you the basics and probably start you wondering and thinking about how you might implement it in your classroom. So reciprocal reading is really about comprehension. It's a strategy, a very formal sort of strategy that promotes engagement from students in reading. It's a carefully scaffolded release of the strategy. It's not something you can pick up today and start doing tomorrow in its complete form. There's preparation that needs to happen, and I'll talk you through that. So I suppose part of this is being patient as a teacher and knowing that putting in the foundations and working to make the foundation strong is going to mean that you'll have a better result at the end. And I'll talk you through that as well. So I suppose what I want you to do is to consider how you would define comprehension. You know, what do you think when you hear the word? How do you teach comprehension at the moment in your classroom? Because that will have an impact on what sorts of things that you offer to your students. Now, we often think of comprehension as simply understanding a text or understanding something that we're reading. And it's far more complicated than that, which of course is the answer to everything in the classroom, isn't it? We used to think comprehension was more about the text, that if we had certain skills as a reader, we could approach any text and find the right answers. No, it's not the way it goes. And you'll know this yourself as a reader, that when you approach, each text is new, each text requires you to do different things in order to understand it. So comprehension is the ultimate goal. That's what we're looking for. There's no point in reading something if you're not going to understand it. But we know now that it's an interchange between the teacher, the reader, the text, and the context in which they're reading. If you think about this yourself, you know that different types of reading that you would have done in your life, from reading textbooks at university to reading for pleasure when you don't have to do anything other than just enjoy the story, and even reading for a book that you're going to use in a book club. It's a different type of reading when you go along that. And each one of those context will influence the type of reading that you do. The difference that we know now is that comprehension has to be intentional. Is the big difference between what we thought in the 60s and what we started to understand in the 80s, 90s, and now, that it's intentional. For you, being a polished reader, it might be difficult for you to even think about being a reader having any difficulty comprehending. But this is not something that automatically happens for children. And research tells us, and I'll repeat this again later, research tells us we have to explicitly teach the type of comprehension skills and strategies that we want our readers to have. It's intentional. There's an active element to this. It's in no way passive. Let me remind you, probably you would have been reading textbooks for university and perhaps not putting an intentional effort into understanding. You get right to the bottom of the page or 3 pages in and you stop and think, what did I just read? And so that's when the intention hasn't helped the comprehension. So more than just understanding a text, it's about the interaction between the reader, the text, and the context they're in. And it's about the intentionality, the desire of the reader to commit to having some kind of comprehension, to having understanding. It's a really interesting conversation to have with children about that. The other thing we know is that comprehension is heavily dependent on lots of factors. And when you do a little bit of reading around comprehension, you wonder how it could ever be that we can comprehend anything, because there are so many influences on us. One of the most important is the background knowledge that we have. So, for example, if I was going to ask you to read a text about some kind of blood disorders, if you're like me, my comprehension would probably be impaired right from the beginning. And that's because I don't have any background knowledge of that area. However, if I spoke to someone about it, if I watched a YouTube clip, if I, talked to an expert, my ability to then come to that text and comprehend it would be greatly increased. And so we need to think about comprehension not just as the time that the children are reading. We also need to think about what we can do to provide some background in whatever topic we're asking them to read about. Okay, what we know about comprehension comes from the cognitive revolution of the 1970s, when we started to be able to look inside the brain through MRIs and fMRIs and things like that. And what we found was, not me, but what the researchers found was that the brain did particular things with particular types of text, with particular types of reading. And from all of this work, we're able to determine that we've got those 3 influences, as I spoke about before, 3 influences on our comprehension. One is us as the reader. What are the things that are intrinsic to us as readers that we bring to any text? What is the text that we're reading? That makes a difference, as you would remember from if you're doing any kind of university reading compared to reading for pleasure. And thirdly, the context. So where are you when you're reading? What is the purpose of your reading, from reading for pleasure to reading for information and things like that. So this means that any time I'm teaching comprehension as a teacher in a classroom, I need to be thinking about these elements. It's, as I said, it's amazing that we comprehend it all. We've got things intrinsic to us, things that are inside the text, and then the context. I forgot to say at the beginning that you should find the handout in the link below. If not now, just sit and listen, and you can find all of this information in a document below. So, reader factors. What is it about the reader that they bring to the text? I want you to think about some students in your classroom who perhaps have the most difficulty comprehending. What do you think it is that's intrinsic to them that makes comprehension difficult? And then what is it for those students who seem to comprehend more easily? What is it that they're bringing to the text? Okay. So here are some things. Definitely, as I said before, background knowledge. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And this is where we have to remember that every text we come to is going to demand new types of strategies for us to use, because it's new information, it's in a new form, and it may be about something that we don't understand or know about at all. The other important thing, and this is related to background knowledge, is the experiences or the knowledge of the world that the students have, and how much they can understand what might be happening to characters in settings and things like this. Another thing is how well they can connect information to what is known already, you know, the work around the schema in the brain. So when they read something about a party in a text, are they able to connect it well by activating their background knowledge, by looking at what they already know about parties and comparing, contrasting, and adding that information to their party schema, maybe changing some information that was in the schema already, adding to it, and maybe working out that something that they thought about that a party isn't what they need to remember. Motivation is key as well. As you will know, if you're motivated to read, whether it's for a purpose or for pleasure, that's going to have a huge impact. And most of us like to read what we choose rather than what somebody gives us to read. All importantly, and the purpose of this introduction to comprehension is the use of comprehension strategies. Now, here's the wealth of about 40 years of research saying that readers don't just look at the words on a page and suddenly comprehension happens. What we do, even as skilled readers, is use a number of comprehension strategies. Not usually one, but a multitude. We flip between them as we go as skilled readers. So skilled that you're probably not aware that you're doing it, which makes it a little bit more difficult to explain to pupils what it is we're trying to do. Strategies are numerous. If you look at the research around comprehension strategies approach as a key search term, perhaps in Google Scholar, you'll find that there's a lot of research around particular types of comprehension strategies. And as I said, we rarely use one, so we need to be teaching students a multitude of strategies. Right, okay. Before I go on to that, we need to think about the text. So we've looked at the reader, the things that the reader has that they bring to the text. So what about the text? What is it about a text that influences comprehension? And a couple of things. It's the text type. So whether it's a particular genre can influence our comprehension. For example, it appears to be easier to read narratives and comprehend than it is to read non-fiction texts. But that's because we have a different purpose in reading, isn't it? We generally want to collect the information from a non-fiction text and hold on to it, whereas in a fiction text, we're kind of flowing through with the story and just enjoying being there. If we miss a little bit of a paragraph, or we, kind of start thinking about what we need to do for dinner, we can come back and generally keep our comprehension going. But it's not the same with a non-fiction text. Our attention needs to be quite focused in that manner. There's also then the idea of top-level structure. Now, if you haven't looked up top-level structure, there's another key search term for you to have a look at. This is the way that an author organizes ideas within a text. Okay, so you've probably all thought about the text types. You've got narratives, reports, procedures, recounts, and so on. But within that and inside that, generally at a paragraph level, you've got a special kind of skeleton that an author will use to structure an idea. 5 different types of sort of skeletons. So some of those are easier for us to comprehend. One is description. So that's just when you lay fact after fact after fact after fact. Fairly simple. Others are cause and effect. Here we're getting into a bit of a more higher level kind of thinking, because as you read, you have to intentionally sort those facts, cause and effect. So another perhaps follow-up for you is around top-level structure. Sometimes we also can be distracted, or parts can be helpful if we look at the text features. These are generally associated with non-fiction texts where you've got glossaries. Your highlighted term means you can go to the back and check in the glossary, diagrams, tables, and things like that. But again, they're going to demand from us different types of reading, different types of comprehension. So overall, we have this pressure, influence from ourselves, from the text, and then lastly, the context within which you're reading. Now, that can be related to the purpose of your reading, as I said before, or it could be related to the environment that you're in and whether or not you can focus on what you're reading. So it might be an idea to think about this incredible thing you're doing when you're helping students to comprehend in your classroom, that all of these influences are working to either help or hinder the type of comprehension that's going on. It's an amazing thing that it happens at all. So comprehension strategies, let's go back to that because we're about to dive into reciprocal reading. So comprehension strategies have been proven in research. We've got about 40 years of evidence that says that this is what good readers do. Good readers predict what might be coming. Good readers question the text as they're reading to check for understanding. Good readers stop and work out where they might have gone wrong if they're not understanding the text. And good readers are able to kind of, at the end, work out what happened. They're able to remember a summary or create a summary of what happens. Now, that's 4 different ways, but there are others as well. What happened in the 80s was that the design and creation of a formal way of using these strategies to teach young children was developed. And we've seen over and over in research, whether it be with children with reading difficulties, quite young children, older children, that the use of these strategies increases their reading skill, even to the level of standardized testing. Okay, so what else have I missed? Right. So this brings us to reciprocal reading, because what they did when they designed reciprocal reading was to take 4 strategies, 4 of those comprehension strategies, and create a formal framework or design to be used in the classroom. So what you will do is generally to implement reciprocal reading. As I said before, you can't necessarily go in tomorrow and start using reciprocal reading, but you can tomorrow start beginning to work towards using reciprocal reading. The first step is for you to teach explicitly these 4 comprehension strategies. Now, the 4 strategies are predicting, clarifying, questioning, and summarizing. Okay? I'm going to talk a little bit later about how you teach each of those. Okay? So you have to teach the 4 strategies, not all at once, but you'll teach the 4 strategies. When you do that, you'll then offer the students opportunities to practice using those strategies in really rich and meaningful kinds of discussions around rich and juicy texts. So 3 stages. First, teaching the strategies independently. Secondly, giving the students options for them to use that in meaningful ways with really lovely texts. And thirdly, as a teacher, ensuring that you're going to withdraw the scaffolding that you've been providing as they've been learning the strategies until you can step away to the degree we do in the classroom and relinquish the use of those strategies and the creation of the conversation to students. This is not a strategy that is about you as a teacher, it's about readers. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 steps, and we'll go into a little bit about those as well. Okay, what do the pupils do? They are going to be using these 4 strategies. So you will have children in groups, small groups, who are reading the same text, who will engage in dialogue about the text. And they're going to deliberately and intentionally, as we said right at the beginning, use the 4 strategies in their reading, but also in their conversations with each other. So they will clarify anything that's unknown, whether it be words or something that they didn't understand. They will clarify their understandings in those conversations. They'll ask teacher-like questions when they use a questioning comprehension strategy. They'll summarize, whether it's a whole page or a short section of the text, and they will, what have I missed? What have I missed? Question, predict, clarify. I can't remember. Anyway, the fourth one, I'll go to them again in a moment. So those 4 strategies. So you will have children working in small groups, choosing a text, if you can do it, that is the same text for all. Now, here's a great time to talk about what type of text and what level of text. If you are doing this for independent reading, which is generally what this is about, remember, this is not about you, this is about readers, I would be thinking that you should be using the easy level text. That is, that the student can read 95 to 100% of the words independently on their own. So these are the books that we usually send home for home readers. As they become more skilled at this, I would think about using instructional level text, so that's 90 to 94% of accuracy. But at the beginning, I would try to relieve some of the angst of word reading and focus on the comprehension by allowing them to read easy level texts, 95 to 100% of accuracy. Okay, so this looks like almost a book club for children, with the intentional addition of them being highly focused on these 4 different strategies. Okay, so before we go any further, here are a few things that, or misconceptions that I hear a lot around reciprocal reading. One is that it's something that involves a lot of writing. You know, the children write and then they have to, the children read and then they have to write these, huge book reports and written summaries and, character, whatever you call it, analysis. And I want you to just think for a moment about the opportunities that children get to read in classrooms where it's reading, where they get the enjoyment out of reading and discussion. Dialogue between students has been shown to increase comprehension exponentially. That dialogue is just as important almost as the comprehension strategies themselves. So let them read, let them discuss, and let that be part of your comprehension narrative in your classroom. I've often asked them, well, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence of the comprehension? And my answer is that I don't think we use enough anecdotal notes or checklists in classrooms. You know, we want some kind of evidence proof students' work, their answering of 6 comprehension questions written down. I would much rather be a teacher walking, observing the group, listening to their discussion, listening to them report on their use of the strategies, filling out a checklist of those strategies, or writing down anecdotal notes about those. To me, that's much more rich data than a child's ability to write the answers to 6 comprehension questions. The other thing you can do is to have a consultation with the students and ask them the questions and record that information. I've seen many teachers do this during independent reading time. They might be able to consult with 5 students a day very quickly. It doesn't take very long. Record the information, then send them back and those sorts of things. So there's always a way to gather more rich data than just having them write. Other people think that they need everything under the sun, laminated, coloured, printed, to support the students doing reciprocal reading. And I don't think that's the case either. I think that with younger children, and even with children who do better with some kind of visual prompt, I think you can use some interesting tools. In particular, and again, you'll see this when you go through and do your own research. Some teachers use a dial made out of a paper plate, and the 4 quadrants for the 4 strategies. And as the children are having their discussion, they may turn the dial to show which strategy they were using or thinking about as they were reading. But you don't need lots of frills and lots of laminated materials. What you do need is a good selection of texts, things that are interesting, things that are high quality. I'd much rather spend time finding that text than finding any kind of flashy thing that I needed to print out. The other thing that's, I think, the main misconception is that you can go into the classroom immediately on learning about reciprocal reading and start doing it. And as I said before, the first point of call is teaching the students explicitly those 4 strategies. And I will talk about that in a moment. Anything else? Oh, yes, the diluting or the mixing up. Yeah, you hear teachers say things like, oh, yeah, I do reciprocal reading, but I use connecting and word wizard and all of these diluted kinds of ideas. My advice to you is if you want to have the results that have come from what we've seen in research, then stick to the format of reciprocal reading as it is described. Okay, you can always do comprehension strategies teaching. You can always teach connecting. You can always teach inferencing. All of that is comprehension strategies approach, and it's well worth doing. In fact, you can't have the entire comprehension curriculum covered just by using reciprocal reading. It's not enough. But don't dilute or mix up reciprocal reading to the point that you're not going to get the effects that it's been shown to have. Okay? You might see some people get confused between literature circles and reciprocal reading. They're similar in some ways, but very different in others. Both I love and both I would use if I was in a classroom right now. They both have very good benefits. And so your comprehension curriculum could involve both. But just be careful that you as a professional understand the boundaries between the different types of approaches so that you can use them to gain the benefits from them. So let's go through the strategies again, because if you don't understand them, if you can't model them, then your pupils aren't going to be able to either. So here's another point for you to step off and start doing some research on your own. What I would like you to do at the end of your research is to have in your classroom your definition of the 4 strategies, your understanding of why we use it, and your examples of when you've used it as a reader. If you do that, you're more than prepared to start then being a teacher of these strategies. So let's look at predicting. It's probably the easiest one to do, so I would start teaching that one first. Predicting means that we use what we know from the text, what we know from our own background knowledge to make an inference about what's coming in the story. Now, you're going to have to write that and explain that in a level that's appropriate to the age of your students. Most of the research around reciprocal reading is done from about primary 3 to right into secondary school. So it's going to be incredibly different the way that you explain and approach this with your pupils. For those of you working in early years, you can still teach comprehension strategies approach. Okay, you could still be using prediction, as I know you are anyway, as an approach. To get the children into the conversations and the dialogue, it seems that most research talks about probably about primary 3 up. Okay, so predicting. When do you do it? Why do you do it? And what's your explanation for that strategy? The second one is questioning. Would I teach this one next? I would probably teach this one next because it's a really juicy one and it can get students really interested, because here's where we need to teach them how to be or how to ask teacher-like questions. And so inside of questioning, my advice would be to go and learn about 3-level guides or you've probably heard of this, is the answer in the text, in your head? Is it between the author and you, or is it something you have to come up with on your own? And this is where inferencing comes in as part of reciprocal reading. So how do you teach questioning? You teach it by looking at different types of questions. Some questions are right there. The answer is right there in the text. Sometimes I have to think and search for the answer. Sometimes I have to look at what the author meant and what I think. And sometimes I'm removed right from the text and I'm having ideas about this in my own kind of world, my own knowledge of the world. Again, this is all in the handout, so it'll help you prompt some searches where you can go and find some more information. Clarifying is something that children, if they haven't been asked to do it, will find more difficult. It's the point where they have to acknowledge that they don't know, or that they're confused, or that they just need some help. Being in a dialogue with their peers can sometimes make this more easy for them. It can be about a word, it can be about a sentence, it can be about a paragraph, it can be about an entire chapter. We talk, we ask questions, we say, I don't understand this, who can help me? Clarifying, again, what is it in your words? How would you describe it to students? How would you tell them why you would do it? Why do adult readers do this? Why do good readers do this? And then examples of when you do it inside text. And lastly is our summarising. Now, this can be difficult for students. And I have seen many teachers fall into a little bit of a trap here, which is thinking that summarising is like recounting what happened. And then I had, when I was doing the last session on reciprocal reading, I was doing before lockdown, and one of the teachers said to me, oh, I get it now. It's like, I wouldn't tell a child to take this note, go to the classroom door, open the door, close the door, go 3 classrooms down, give the note to Mr. Brown, get Mr. Brown to answer the note. I wouldn't do that. I would say, here's a note, take it to Mr. Brown and come back with a response. And that's the perfect example of the difference between the sequence or the recount of something and the summarising. What are the big main points? And I find it more easy in this case to look at what is the message that the author is giving? What's the real thing that this section of text is about? We don't want to tell them to step by step go to the classroom door, open the door, close the door. We want them to find out what this is really about. Again, don't be tempted into thinking that summarising has to be written. Allow them to talk. The talk is highly beneficial to comprehension. Writing can come at another time, perhaps later, another lesson, but allow them in that space after reading to talk. It's really important. The data on how often and the duration of reading in classrooms is kind of horrific. So any opportunity you can give to students to do a longish kind of durations of reading, all the better. They need it. Okay, so thinking about in the classroom and using these strategies, teaching students to use these, you would need to go through the steps to teach each strategy individually. Remember, I said we have to explicitly teach this. So there is a little bit of a prompt in the handout which talks about, first of all, activating their prior knowledge around the strategy. So let's say when questioning, we would ask them, so what are questions? Why do we ask questions? What types of questions do we ask? What do they know already? Then defining the strategy. That's when your knowledge of the strategy is imperative. If you don't understand it and can't articulate what it means at the level that's necessary for your pupils, then you're going to have difficulty getting them to do it. Highly important next step, modelling it. Now, you don't have to model it with entire text. You can model it with one page out of a text. I love using Anthony Brown for my modelling sessions because his one page can be enough to have you speaking for an hour about what is going on in this picture. And they always prompt me as a reader to ask questions. So I would very much recommend that you did some modelling with single pages or a double page spread from a text that you, as a reader yourself, need to go, wow, what is going on there? Why, who, where, and all of those kinds of things. Okay, then you provide the students with the opportunities to practice. You can see this is just your basic scaffold, isn't it? Provide them with opportunities to use those individual strategies. Later, when you start doing proper reciprocal reading, you'll engage them in using and shifting from strategy to strategy. When we do studies of really, really good readers, they never stick to one. They'll use one, they might hit something that they're not sure about, and they'll use another strategy. And this is the beauty of reciprocal reading, and why it's worked so well in research is that it's almost replicating what a good reader does. Access to these 4 strategies, access to dialogue amongst peers, and then you're going to have an increase in comprehension. So in the studies that are done about reciprocal reading, usually don't do any sort of assessment or check up on what the student, how well this is working until sort of at the minimum 5 weeks after the students have started using it. So again, I said this is going to be about patience, right? First, you have to teach each individual strategy. Teach it well, make sure that they understand it, they can talk it to you, they can use it individually. Then give them the opportunities to engage in the reciprocal reading, so sitting in a group with their peers, reading and discussing the text. 5, 10 weeks later, or 10 opportunities for them to engage in reciprocal reading, then I would be looking at having a bit of a look around at what has happened, what kind of improvement. And of course, that means you could do some pre-testing at the beginning that would show you the greatest level of improvement. You don't have to have standardized tests for this though. As I said, you'll have checklists, you'll have anecdotal notes, you'll have interviews or consultations with the students, and you will see that this is making an improvement. Something that I've seen teachers do, which is really nice, is to do a pre-test of the comprehension strategies. So asking the students to draw or write what it means to question, asking them to draw or write prediction, and then at the 10-week mark, asking them to either annotate or add on to their initial thoughts, or to create another diagram or a statement about them again, and to see the level of understanding of those strategies increase, because that's just as important as the comprehension itself at this stage, while we're getting them to behave and engage like good skilled readers. Okay, so before I end, some cautions. If you see teachers who say they're doing reciprocal reading, but they haven't done the explicit teaching, they're not going to get the results, okay? End of the story is that you have to teach this explicitly. Without that, you may as well continue on and not engage in reciprocal reading. You may as well just teach the strategies on their own. You must do it explicitly if you want to do reciprocal reading. You introduce them one at a time. As I said, I would start with prediction, then go to questioning, then to clarifying, and leave summarising for the end. You need to do that in a gradual release of the responsibility, from activating their prior knowledge to modelling it for them, and to giving them lots of opportunities where you're going to be there to help them to try it out. And then remember that this is only one part of a comprehension curriculum, that it's teaching the students an incredible amount of good stuff in a small framework, but you'll need to, over and beyond that, be engaging in other comprehension strategies and other types of texts and all sorts of other ideas that you have in your programs. It's only a part of that, but a very valuable part. Remember too to use really interesting texts. And reciprocal reading doesn't have to be done about an entire book. As I said, it could be done about a 2-page spread. It could be done about the lyrics of a song. It could be done about a poem. Just mix it up, and also think about that motivational element that comes in as an intrinsic reader factor. What is it that your students might be interested in? So I'm going to leave you with 4 questions to prompt you thinking about the webinar, but also to help you do the next step, because here's been your brief intro. Now you're going to have to do a little bit of work around finding out about the strategies, finding something that you're going to use to support them in class, whether it's question stems or a spinning dial or some role descriptors, whatever it is that you want to do. So what does comprehension mean? Right back at the beginning, you'll remember what I said. What is it that you need to remember about comprehension when you're thinking about reciprocal reading? It's not a passive thing, is it? It's more than that. What are the influences on comprehension? When you're thinking about the children in your classroom, the children you're seeing have more difficulty with comprehension, those that are succeeding, what are the influences behind that? Remember, there's a great deal of stuff happening behind the scenes from the reader's point of view, and also the text that you choose, and then the context, what type of reading, what purpose, what you're asking them to do with their reading. Why is reciprocal reading thought to work? You can probably answer that knowing that we are using inside that strategy, comprehension strategies, that's been proven to work. We know good readers use more than one strategy at a time, Reciprocal reading is the answer to some of these questions. How do you do it in the classroom? Okay, that's going to have to take some time and consideration for you and your planning. Thinking that you're not going to get results in the first week because you'll be teaching the strategies. Then allow them to have 10 or so times of using the strategies in their reciprocal reading groups, and look out for other ways that you can assess that. And that's the last question. What could you look for to evaluate your implementation of the strategy? Talk to the students about what's happening for them in these groups and what's happening in their gradual understanding of these comprehension strategies and what it feels like to be a really skilled reader. Okay, I think that's probably enough to get you going on doing some more research yourself. I'm going to enable this to be recorded so that you can come back and watch again and again. And please leave comments below if you thought this was helpful to you. And I would love to have some updates if you give it a go and you find it works. In a month or so, I'm going to be doing a live streaming talking about the modelling part of reciprocal reading, talking about think alouds and how you do them as a teacher. So maybe that will be helpful to some of you a bit later. In the end, thank you very much for joining me this morning, and I hope that was useful. Have a great day.